Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever or wherever you are watching it. It is daylight outside for me, which is rare on these. It's 6:50 a.m. here in the Eastern time zone of the United States. It is Friday, the 28th of June, 2024. Happy birthday to my mother. Anyway, today I slept in a little bit later than normal because I stayed up a whole lot later than normal watching the first debate of this presidential season. I will not comment on the debate here. Uh, so today we start verse 22 or chapter 22 in the book of Leviticus. We're going to go through the first part, try to break it down, talk about what it meant to them, and point some things out in it, and then look forward and look in the mirror and what it means to us, not in the sense of a law, but in some lessons that we can glean from it. All right, so reading from the New King James translation, again, this is chapter 22. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to Aaron and his sons that they separate themselves from the holy things of the children of Israel, and that they do not profane my holy name by what they dedicate to me. I am the Lord. Say to them, Whoever of all your descendants throughout all your generations, whoever goes near the holy things which the children of Israel dedicate to the Lord while he has uncleanliness upon him, that person shall be cut off from my presence. I am the Lord. Whatever man of the descendants of Aaron who's a leper, who has a discharge, shall not eat the holy offerings until he is clean. And whoever touches anything made unclean by a corpse, or a man who has an emission of semen, or whoever touches any creeping things by which he would be made unclean, or a person by whom he would become unclean, whatever his uncleanliness may be, the person who has touched any such thing shall be unclean until evening, and shall not eat the holy offerings unless he washes his body with water. And when the sun goes down, he shall be clean, and afterward he may eat the holy offerings, because it is his food. Whatever dies naturally or is torn by beasts, he shall not eat to defile himself with it. I am the Lord. They shall therefore keep my ordinances, lest they bear sin for it and die thereby, if they profane it. I, the Lord, sanctify them. No outsiders should eat the holy offerings. One who dwells with the priest or a hired servant shall not eat the holy things. But if the priest buys a person with his money, he may eat it, and one who is born in his house may eat the food. If the priest's daughter is married to an outsider, she may not eat the holy offerings. But if the priest's daughter is a widow or divorced and has no child, and has returned to her father's house as in her youth, she may eat her father's food, but no outsiders shall eat it. And if a man eats the holy offering unintentionally, then he shall restore the holy offering to the priest and add 1/5 to it. They shall not profane the holy offerings of the children of Israel, which they offer to the Lord, or allow them to bear the guilt of their trespass when they eat the holy offerings. For I, the Lord, sanctify them. All right, so there's two kind of basic sessions in today's reading, or sections. The first one is talking about doing the holy duties, and the second, it's kind of three sections: doing the holy duties, eating the holy food, which is what the priest would eat from the sacrifices, and then this section about who can participate in that. The overall gist of that is that the priests had knowledge of what clean and unclean was, and so they had to follow that and know that they were priests. They were representing the people in front of a holy God. They had been chosen for that, so they had no excuse for ignorance. As a matter of fact, this first thing about approaching God and doing the duties that they were supposed to do, when they were unclean, then they would be cut off from God. That's something that, even though it hadn't been officially said by God at that time. If you remember back in chapter 10, if you haven't seen that session, go look for it on Facebook or YouTube here. But back in chapter 10, you've got two of Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, who apparently were drunk and went to do their duties. And so it was said that they offered a profane or unholy fire, and they were killed. So it's a really, really big deal. These priests, again, they were held to a higher standard. They were supposed to be set totally apart. So they knew they had no reason to claim ignorance. So they needed to remain clean. If they weren't clean, that didn't mean they got kicked out of the priesthood. There's lots of things that can make you unclean, as we see in the next session. We're talking about if they're a leper or have a discharge or touch something that is unholy, like a corpse, or if they have an emission of semen. So if they're married and they're having relations with their wife, there is a period of time because of the semen that they are unclean. So there's lots of things that could make them unclean. They just had to follow the rules about what they could and couldn't do while they were unclean. And there was different time frames that uncleanliness would be there. We've talked about those over the past several sessions. So they knew, and they would know clean or unclean. And it was a big deal for them to not do anything in their duties when they were unclean. And it was also a big deal for them not to eat the holy food when they were unclean. But certainly, as we read down through for different things, they simply, on some situations, just had to wait till evening, and some others they had to wash themselves and wait till evening. But there were things that they could do to get to a point of cleanliness so that they wouldn't starve. Then it finishes that section by saying, therefore, these priests are supposed to keep God's ordinances, his rules, what he's laid out for them, so they wouldn't bear the sin and die. Because again, they knew what they were doing, and it would be a conscious choice for them to choose to ignore a holy God, which would be a horrible thing. And then this last section here talks about who can participate in not the duties, but the food that was from the holy offerings. And it uses the word outsiders, and another word may be laymen. This would be anybody who's not in the priesthood. It could be other Israelites. More than likely it would be, but not in the priesthood. So it speaks to people that are in the household of the priest, permanent members of the household, all being able to participate by eating the holy food. But people who were not permanent residents of the household, and that would be an outsider, one who dwells with the priest, that would be like a visitor that was living with the priest temporarily, or a hired servant who was living with the priest temporarily. The priest would make arrangements for those people to eat, but they couldn't eat the holy food. They would have to get the food from some other source. And then it lays out all these conditions or the situations where people could participate. So those were members of the household. There is a verse in here, verse 11, that says that, but if a priest buys a person with his money, he may eat it. So it's important to understand that that's not slavery the way that we think about it in the United States. So the horrible stuff that happened with the slave trade, that's not it. The situation here is if a priest would buy a slave, and that was just common back then. It is not something that is being promoted by this. It is just a fact of life back then. They were actually members of the household. It wasn't somebody that was cast aside or treated horribly. They were members of the household, and it is very evident that they were members of the household because they got to partake in the food of the holy offerings. And if they were being mistreated, somebody would be guilty of uncleanliness, and it would be a mess, and they couldn't do it. So that shows that it was a far different picture of being a slave in this sense than what we would think about today. And then it talks about a daughter of the priest. If she marries another person, she can't partake in them. That would be if she married someone that wasn't another priest. And the reason for that is that when a woman was married, to become one, she became one with a new family. and left her original family. So that would be the leave and cleave thing for marriage. But if something happened and there was either a divorce or she was widowed, as long as she didn't have a child with that person who wasn't a priest, then she would be welcomed back into the priest's home and could partake in eating the food from the holy offerings. The last provision here is that it says that if a man eats the holy offering unintentionally, so this would be talking about, again, an outsider, a layman, someone not in the priesthood and not permanently in a priest's home, that if he ate those and then found out that he ate them, that he wasn't going to be put to death or anything, but he had to replace what he took plus 20%. And that was because, again, that was special food that had been offered by the children of Israel, and that was only for the priests. And it says last, for God is the one who sanctified those holy offerings. So it's a big deal. So what is that? When we look at this, sections like this, what is saying to us? Well, first of all, we're not under the law, and we're not this priesthood. So we don't have these rules and regulations about all this stuff. But if you read in the New Testament, and especially in the book of First Peter in chapter 2, there's 2 sections that really talk about the fact that we are a priesthood. If you have repented and put your faith in Christ alone, here's what it says in 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 5 says, you believers, like living stones, are being built up into a spiritual house for a holy and dedicated priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices that are acceptable and pleasing to God through Jesus Christ. This is the Amplified translation, which if you've watched this at all, you know that I really like for some situations. And then if you skip down to verses 9 and 10 in that same chapter, it says, but you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a consecrated nation, a special people for God's own possession, so that you may proclaim the excellencies, the wonderful deeds and virtues and perfections of him who has called you out of the darkness into his marvelous light. Once you were not a people at all, but now you're God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. 2 points, okay? First one, we take communion. We do the Lord's Supper, whatever your church is, however you do it. Radius, where my wife and I are partners, we do it every single week. And we do it every single week because we want to remember and we want to keep top of mind Christ's sacrifice and participate in that. They did it every week back in the early church. But it is important to kind of take a lesson from today's reading and realize that we shouldn't approach that flippantly. We shouldn't approach that in an unclean manner. And when I say unclean, I mean when we approach communion, the Lord's Supper, we're supposed to have a clean heart and a clean conscience. In other words, if we've got something that we've done, if we've got something that we're thinking, if we have a problem with somebody, we're supposed to get that taken care of between us and God, or if it's a problem with somebody, between us and them before we approach communion. So that's similar to clean, unclean. And we're not going to die if we don't do that right. But that situation, when we go into it not clean of those things, then it breaks what the whole intention of doing it in the first place. And that's celebrating that oneness with God through what Christ has done. And if we're coming to it with stuff that we haven't taken care of, then we can't really celebrate that. So that's the first lesson. The second lesson, and this is something that is drastically important, especially after watching the debate last night. If you are a follower of Christ, if you have repented and put your faith in Christ alone, then we are family. It doesn't matter what your ethnicity is. It doesn't matter what your sex is. It doesn't, which by the way, male and female are only two. It doesn't matter where you're from. It doesn't matter if you're tall, short, fat, skinny, good looking, not good looking. It doesn't matter, old, young. We our family. And we have got to start looking at each other as family and realizing that we are one in Christ and we're commanded to be one in Christ. And we really need to, as a church, Big C church, not just one individual, we really need to start acting more like it. So my challenge for you today, as it is Friday, as we do go into the weekend, is start acting like those other believers. Even somebody you may not like their personality, whatever, it doesn't matter. They're family. And we need to treat people like family and love each other as Christ commanded us. Everybody have a great weekend. Please go to a Bible consistent, Bible teaching, Bible preaching, Bible living church this weekend and be in a community of believers. Have a great day. See you next session, which